Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind troubled with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems. The ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Let my voice wash over you at a comfortable volume and allow yourself to be distracted from the stresses and worries that play on your mind. Whether you need help falling asleep or going back to sleep in the middle of the night, you can trust me to keep you company and help you to wake up tomorrow in a rested state. You may need to try out Sleepy Time Tales for a few nights to get used to the slightly strange idea, but I believe it will be well worth your while. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So settle down, relax, and allow yourself to get lost in my telling of tonight's story. Before we get to tonight's reading, I'd like to ask for a few minutes of your time. Sleepy Time Tales is a listener-supported podcast. I can only keep it going, paying for the services and tools I use, and justify the time I use on it, thanks to the generosity of listeners like you. So if you're finding Sleepy Time Tales useful, if it helps you to get a restful night, and you would like to keep it going out to thousands of your fellow insomniacs, please consider supporting it on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is monthly support that not only helps me keep the lights on, but can also get you fun bonuses based on your contribution level. So go along there, take a look, and sign up if you're interested. You can also make once-off tips to the tip jar on the website, and you can support the show without having to do so financially by just telling people about it. If you know someone who you think it will help, tell them where to find it and just see how it goes. And that's enough of that. Let's pick up where we are learning a little bit about the manufacture and repair of trains. We return this week to Rides on Railways by Samuel Sidney. The steam hammer, be it known, is the application of steam to a piston under complete regulation, so that the piston, armed with a hammer, regularly, steadily, perpendicularly descends as desired, either with a force of 100 tons or with a gentle tap, just sufficient to drive home a tin tack and no more. At a word it stops midway in stroke, and at a word again it descends with a deadly thump. On our visit, an attempt was being made to execute in wrought what had hitherto always been made in cast iron. Success would effect a great saving in weight. The doors of the furnace were drawn back, and a white glow, unbearable as the noonday sun, was made visible. Long hooked iron poles were thrust in to fish for the prize, and presently a great round mass of metal was poked out to the door of the fiery furnace. A huge roll of glowing iron, larger than it was possible for any 1 or 2 men to lift, even had it been cold. By ingenious contrivances it was slipped out upon a small iron truck, dragged to the anvil of the steam hammer, and under the direction of Vulcan, not without his main strength, lodged upon the block. During the difficult operation of moving the white-red round ball, it was beautiful to see the rapid, disciplined intelligence by which the hammerman, with a word or sign, regulated the movements of his young assistants, each armed with an iron lever. At length the word was given, and thump, thump, like an earthquake, the steam hammer descended, rapidly reducing the red-hot Dutch cheese shape to the flatter proportions of a mighty double Gloucester. All the while the great smith was turning and twisting it about, so that each part should receive its due share of hammering, and that the desired shape should be rapidly attained. Sometimes with one hand, sometimes with the other, he interposed a flat poker between the red mass and the hammer, sharing a vibration that was powerful enough to dislocate the shoulder of any lesser man. "Hold," he cried. The elephant-like machine stopped. He took and hauled the great ball into a new position. "Go on," he shouted. The elephant machine went back on, and again the red sparks flew as though 1,000 Homeric blacksmiths had been striking in unison, until it was time again to thrust the half-welded cheese into the fiery furnace. And again it was dragged forth, and the jolly giant bent and tugged and sweated and commanded. He did not swear over his task. At length, having succeeded in making the unwieldy lump assume an approach to the desired shape, he observed, in a deep bass chuckling, triumphant aside, to the engineer who was looking on, "I'm not a very little one, but I think if I was a big again, you'd try what I was made of." Since that day, we have learnt the experiment has been completely successful. With a great diminution in weight, and an increase of the strength of an important part of a locomotive. We have dwelt upon the picture because it combined mechanical with manual dexterity. A hammerman who might sit for one of Homer's blacksmith's heroes, and machinery which effects in a few minutes what an army of such hammermen could not do. If our painters of mythological Vulcans and sprawling satyrs want to display their powers over flesh and muscle, they may find something real and not vulgar among our iron factories. After seeing the operations of forging or of casting, we may take a walk around the shops of the turners and smiths. In some Whitworth's beautiful self-acting machines are planing or polishing or boring holes, under charge of an intelligent boy. In others, lathes arranged around the walls, and a double row of vases down the center of the long rooms. Solid masses of cast or forged metal are carved by the keen, powerful lathe tools, like so much boxwood, and long shavings of iron and steel sweep off as easily as steel shavings from carpenter's plane. At the long row of vases, the smiths are hammering and filing away with careful dexterity. No mean amount of judgment in addition to the long training needed for acquiring manual skill is requisite before a man can be admitted to this army of skilled mechanics. For every locomotive contains many hundred pieces, each of which must be fitted as carefully as a watch. If we fairly contemplate the result of these labors, created by the inventive genius of a line of ingenious men, headed by Watt and Stevenson, these workshops are a more imposing sight than the most brilliant review of disciplined troops. It is not mere strength, dexterity, and obedience upon which the locomotive builder calculates for the success of his design, but also upon the separate and combined intelligence of his army of mechanics. Considering that in annually increasing numbers, factories for the building of locomotive, of marine steam engines, of iron ships, and of various forms of machinery are established in different parts of the kingdom, and that hence every year education becomes more needed, more valued, and more extended among this class of mechanics, it is impossible to doubt that the training, mental and moral, obtained in factories like those of Wolverton, Crewe, Derby, Swindon, and other railway shops, and in great private establishments like Whitworth's and Roberts of Manchester, Maudsley and Fields of London, Ransom and May of Ipswich, Wilson of Leeds, and Stevenson of Newcastle, must produce by imitative inoculation a powerful effect on the national character. The time has passed when the best workmen were the most notorious drunkards. In all skilled trades, self-respect has made progress. A few passenger carriages are occasionally built at Wolverton as experiments. One, the invention of Mr. J. McConnell, the head of the locomotive department, effects several important improvements. It's a composite carriage of corrugated iron, lined with wood to prevent unpleasant vibration, on 6 wheels, the center wheels following the leading wheels round curves by a very ingenious arrangement. This carriage holds 60 second-class passengers and 15 first-class, beside a guard's brake, which will hold 5 more, all in one body. The saving in weight amounts to 35%. A number of locomotives have lately been built from the designs of the same eminent engineer to meet the demands of the passenger traffic in excursion trains for July and August 1851. It must be understood that although locomotives are built at Wolverton, only a small proportion of the engines used on the line are built by the company, and the chief importance of the factory at Wolverton is as a repairing shop and a school for engine drivers. Every engine has a number. When an engine on any part of the lines in connection with Wolverton needs repair, it is forwarded with a printed form, filled up and signed by the superintendent of the station near which the engine has been working. As thus, engine 60, axle of driving wheel out of gauge, firebox burned out, etc. This invoice, or bill of particulars, is copied into a sort of daybook, to be eventually transferred into the account of the ledger in which number 60 has a place. The superintendent next in command under the locomotive engineer-in-chief places the lame engine in the hands of the foreman, who happens to be first disengaged. The foreman sets the workmen he can spare at the needful repairs. When completed, the foreman makes a report, which is entered in the ledger opposite the number of the engine, stating the repairs done, the men's names who did it, and how many days, hours, and quarters of an hour each man was employed. The engine reported sound is then returned to its station, with a report of the repairs which have been effected. The whole work is completed on the principle of a series of links of responsibility. The engineer-in-chief is answerable to the directors for the efficiency of the locomotives. He examines the book and depends on his superintendent. The superintendent depends on the foreman to whom the work was entrusted, and should the work be slurred, must bear the shame, but can turn upon the workmen he selected for the job. In fact, the whole work of this vast establishment is carried on by dividing the workmen into small companies, under the superintendence of an officer responsible for the quantity and quality of the work of his men. The history of each engine, from the day of launching, is so kept that, so long as it remains in use, every separate repair, with its date and the names of the men employed on it, can be traced. Allowing, therefore, for the disadvantage as regards economy of a company, as compared with private individuals, the system at Wolverton is as effective as anything that could be well imagined. The men employed at Wolverton Station in March 1851 numbered 775, of whom 4 were overlookers, 9 were foremen, 4 draftsmen, 15 clerks, 32 engine drivers, 21 firemen, and 119 labourers. The rest were mechanics and apprentices. The weekly wages amounted to $929, 11 shillings, 10 pence. Of course, these men have, for the most part, wives and families, and so with shopkeepers raised the population of the railway town of Wolverton to about 2,000, inhabiting a series of uniform brick houses in rectangular streets, about a mile distant from the ancient parish church of Wolverton, and the half-dozen houses constituting the original parish. For the benefit of this population, the directors have built a church, schools for boys, for girls, and for infants, which are not the least remarkable or interesting parts of this curious town. The clergyman of the railway church, the Reverend George Waite, M.A., has been resident at Wolverton from the commencement of the railway buildings. His difficulties are great, but he is well satisfied with his success. In railway towns there's only one class, and that's so thoroughly independent that the influence of the clergyman can only rest with his character and talents. The church is thinly attended in the morning, for hard-working men like to indulge in rest one day in the week. In the evening it is crowded, and the singing far above average. To the schools we should like to have devoted a whole chapter now, but must reserve an account of one of the most interesting results of railway enterprise. There is a literary and scientific institution, with a library attached. Scientific lectures and scientific books are very little patronized at Wolverton. Astronomy and geology have few students. But there is a steady demand for a great number of novels, voyages and travels, and musical entertainments are well supported. The lecture room is extremely miserable, quite unfit for a good concert, as there is not even a retiring room. But the directors are about to build a better one, and while they're about it, they might as well build a small theatre. Some such amusement is much needed. For want of relaxation in the monotony of a town composed of one class, without any public amusements, the men are driven too often to the pipe and pot and the women to gossip. In the summer, the gardens which form a suburb are much resorted to, and the young men go to cricket and football. But still, some amusement, in which all the members of the family should join, would improve the moral tone of Wolverton. Work, wages, schools, libraries, and scientific lectures are not alone enough to satisfy a large population of any kind. Certainly not a population of hard-handed workers. Wolverton Embankment was one of the difficulties in railway making, which at one point interested the public. At present it is not admitted among engineers that there are any difficulties. The ground was a bog, and as fast as the earth was tipped in at the top it bulged out at the bottom. When, after great labour, this difficulty had been overcome, part of the embankment, 50 feet in height, which contained alum shale, decomposed, and spontaneous combustion ensued. The amazement of the villagers was great, but finally they came to the conclusion, expressed by one of them, in, "Dang it, they can't make this here railway after all," and they set it afire to cheat their creditors. On leaving Wolverton, before arriving at Road, a second-class station, after clearing a short cutting, looking westerly we catch a glimpse of the tower of the Church of Grafton, where, according to tradition, Edward IV married the Lady Grey of Groby. The last interview between Henry VIII and the Cardinal Campeggio, relative to his divorce from Catherine of Aragon, took place at the mansion house of this parish, which was demolished in 1643. About this spot we enter Northamptonshire, and passing Road, pause at Blisworth Station, where there is a neat little inn. Blisworth, Northampton. Blisworth, Northampton, Wellingborough, Higham Ferrers, Thrapston, Houndel, Wansford, Stamford by coach, Peterborough. From Blisworth branches out the line to Peterborough, with 16 stations, of which we name above the more important. The route presents a constant succession of beautiful and truly English rural scenery, of rich lowland pastures, watered by the winding rivers and bounded by hills, on which, like sentinels, a row of ancient church towers stand. The first station is Northampton. Northampton, on a hill on the banks of the River Nene, is a remarkably pleasant town, with several fine old buildings, an ancient church, an open market square, neat, clean streets, and suburbs of pretty villas, overlooking from the hilltop fat green meadows flooded in winter. Shoemaking on a wholesale scale is the principal occupation of the inhabitants. For strong shoes, Northampton can compete in any foreign market, and a good many light articles, cut after French patterns, have been successfully made since the trade was thrown open by Peel's tariff. There are several factories in which a large number of young persons are employed, but the majority work by the piece at home for the master manufacturers. Northampton is also great in the fairs and markets of a rich agricultural district, and rejoices over races twice a year, in which the facilities of the railroad have rendered some compensation to the innkeepers for the loss of the coaching trade. Northampton was originally intended to be a main station of the railway between London and Birmingham. The inhabitants were silly enough to resist the bestowal of this benefit upon them, and unfortunate enough to be successful in their resistance. In after years, when experience had rendered fools wise, they were glad to obtain the present branch through to Peterborough. But the injury of the ill-judged opposition can never be cured. The Church of All Saints in the centre of the town has an ancient embattled tower, which escaped the Great Fire of 1675. St. Peter's near the West Bridge, a remarkably curious specimen of enriched Norman, St. Sepulchre's, a round church of the 12th century, all deserve remuneration. There are also 2 hospitals, the only remains of many religious houses which existed before the Reformation. St. John's consists of a chapel and a large hall, with apartments for inferior poor persons. St. Thomas's is for 20 poor almswomen. No vestiges, beyond the earthworks, remain of the castle built by Simon de St. Lee, who was created Earl of Northampton by William the Conqueror. Northampton was a royal residence during the reigns of Richard I, John, and Henry III. A battlefield during the Wars of the Barons and the Wars of the Roses, but the ancient character of the town was almost entirely destroyed by the Great Fire of 1675. Not without benefit to the health, though at the expense of the picturesqueness of this ancient borough. Northampton is important as the capital town of one of our finest grazing and hunting counties, where soil and climate are both favourable to the farmer. Large numbers of the Scotch, Welsh, and Herefords sold in Smithfield are fed in the yards and finished in the pastures of Northamptonshire. The present Earl of Spencer keeps up, on a limited scale, the herd of shorthorns, which was so celebrated during the lifetime of his brother, better known as Lord Althorp, at his seat of Althorp, 6 miles from the town, and also carries on a little fancy farming. The late Earl of Spencer was much more successful as a breeder than as a farmer. Indeed, it may be questioned whether the prejudices of that amiable and excellent man in favour of pasture land did not exercise an injurious influence over the proceedings of the Royal Agricultural Association. Northampton returns 2 members to Parliament, and as a mayor and corporation. The railway route from Northampton to Peterborough represents a series of pleasant views on either side. So pleasant that he who has leisure should walk or ride on horseback along the line of Saxon villages. Visit the series of curious churches at Wellingborough, Higham Ferrers with its collegiate church and almshouse, Thrapston and Oundle and other stations. Within 2 miles of Thrapston is Drayton House. Lowick, the seat of the Sackville family, which retains many of the features of an ancient castle, and has a gallery of paintings by the old masters. The church of Lowick contains several monuments, brasses and windows of stained glass. Near Oundle is to be found the earthwork of Fotheringay Castle. where Mary Queen of Scots was confined, tried, and executed. The castle itself was levelled to the ground by order of her son, James I. On leaving Oundle, we pass a station appurtenant to Wansford in England, of which we shall say a word presently. Here we may take coach across Stamford in Lincolnshire, unless we prefer the rail from Peterborough. There is a point somewhere hereabouts where the three counties of Northampton, Lincoln, and Huntingdon all meet. Wansford in England. If about to investigate the antiquities of Stamford or Peterborough, the traveller will do well to stop at Wansford for the sake of one of the best inns in Europe. Well known under the sign of the Haycock at Wansford in England. This sign represents a man stretched floating on a haycock, apparently in conversation with parties on a bridge. It is intended to illustrate the legend of drunk Barnaby, who, travelling through the time of the plague from London northward, tasting and criticizing the ale on the road, drank so much of the Northamptonshire brews that he fell asleep on a haycock in one of the flat meadows. In the night time, as is often the case in this part of the country, a sudden flood arose, and our toper awake to find himself floating on a great tide of water, which at length brought him to a bridge, upon which, hailing the passengers, he asked, "Where am I?" in full expectation of having floated to France or Spain. Whereupon they answered, "At Wansford." "What?" he exclaimed in ecstasy. "Wansford in England?" And landing, drank the ale and gave a new name to the inn of this village, between three counties. The inn, which belongs to the Duke of Bedford, affords a sort of accommodation, which the rapid travelling and short halts of railways have almost abolished. But an easy rent, a large farm, and a trade in selling and hiring hunters enables the landlord to provide as comfortably for his guests as when, in the old posting days, 5 dukes made the haycock their night halt at one time. On entering the well-carpeted coffee-room with its ample screen, blazing fire, and plentiful allowance of easy chairs, while a well-appointed, tempting dinner is rapidly and silently laid on the spotless tablecloth, the tired sportsman or traveller will be inclined to fancy that he is visitor to some wealthy squire, rather than the guest of an innkeeper. When we add that the bedrooms match the sitting rooms, that the charges are moderate, and that the Pytchley, Earl Fitzwilliam's, and the Duke of Rutland's hounds, the beaver, meet within a short distance, that their county abounds in antiquities, show houses like Burley, that pleasant woodland rides are within a circle of 10 miles, that good pike fishing is to be had nearly all the year round, while in retirement Wansford is complete. We have said enough to show that it is well worth the notice of a large class of travellers, from young couples on their first day's journey to old gentlemen travelling north and needing quiet and a bottle of old port. The last station, Peterborough, presents an instance of a city without population, without manufacturers, without trade, without a good inn or even a copy of the Times, except at the railway station. A city which would have gone on slumbering to the present hour with the go-ahead principle of any kind, and which has nevertheless, by the accident of situation, had railway greatness thrust upon it in a most extraordinary manner. Peterborough is one of the centres from which radiate 3 lines to London, by the Northampton route, on which we have travelled, by the direct line through Herts of the Great Northern, and by the eastern counties, with all its Norfolk communications. From Peterborough also proceeds an arm of the Midland counties, through Stamford, Oldham, and Melton Mowbray, and the best Leicestershire Grass County, to Leicestershire or to Nottingham, while the Great Northern, dividing, embraces the whole of Lincolnshire, and makes way to Hull by the Humber ferries on the one hand, and to York on the other. It is therefore the best of consolation on being landed in this dull, inhospitable city, that it is the easiest possible thing to leave it. Peterborough dates from the revival of Christianity among the Saxons. Destroyed by the Danes AD 870, rebuilt by Edgar in 970, it was attacked and plundered by Saxon insurgents from the Fens under Hereward the Wake in the time of William the Conqueror. At the dissolution of religious houses under Henry VIII, Peterborough was one of the most magnificent abbeys, and having been selected as the seat of one of the new bishoprics, the buildings were preserved entire. In the Civil Wars, the Lady Chapel and several conventual buildings were pulled down and the materials sold. At present, the cathedral is a regular cruciform structure of Norman character, remarkable for the solidity of its construction. It was commenced 1117 by John de Says, a Norman. The chancel was finished in AD 1140 by Abbot Martin de Vecti. The great transept and a portion of the central tower was built by Abbot William de Vaudeville, AD 1160 to 1175, and the nave by Abbot Benedict, 1177 to 1193. The fitting up of the choir is of woodwork richly carved. The greater number of monuments, shrines, and chantry chapels were destroyed by the parliamentary troops. 2 queens lie buried here, Catherine of Aragon and Mary of Scotland, without elegy or epitaph, monument or tombstone. The cathedral viewed, nothing remains to detain travellers in this peculiarly stupid city. Within a pleasant ride of 5 miles lies Milton House, the seat of Earl Fitzwilliam. Stamford. Although Stamford is not upon this line of railway, travellers passing near should not fail to visit so ancient and interesting a town. Few English boroughs can trace back more distinctly their antiquity. 6 churches still remain of the 15, which, beside many conventual buildings, formerly adorned it. For Stamford was one of the towns which, had not the Reformation intervened, would have been swallowed up by the ever-hungry ecclesiastical maw. Stamford awakens many historic recollections. It has a place in Domesday Book, being there styled Stanford. King Stephen had an interview there with Ranulph, Earl of Chester. In 1190, the Jews of Stamford were plundered and slain by the recruits proceeded to their crusades. And 10 years afterwards, when Edward I expelled the Jews from England, the synagogue and noble library at Stamford were profaned and sold. Many of the books were purchased by Gregory of Huntingdon, a monk of Ramsey Abbey, a diligent student of ancient languages and thus the result of much learning, collected in Spain and Italy and handed down from the time when the Jews and Arabs almost alone cultivated literature as well as commerce, was sown in England, the last of the European kingdoms to become distinguished in letters. Stamford was the refuge of Oxford students on the occasion of disturbances in 1333. It was taken by the Lancastrian army of the north under Queen Margaret in 1461 and given up to plunder. And in 1462, when 30,000 Lincolnshire men marched, under the command of Sir Robert Wells, against Edward IV, under the walls of Stamford they were defeated, and flying left their coats behind. But the latest battles of Stamford have been between Whig and Tory, and even these have ceased. The houses and public buildings are all built of a rich cream-coloured stone, which gives an air of cleanliness and even distinction, which is an immense advantage. There are 2 fine hotels. The borough returns 2 members, both nominated by the Marquis of Exeter, who owns a large proportion of the vote-giving house. The bull running has been abolished here, as also at Tutbury in Staffordshire. But those who are curious to see the ceremony may have occasional opportunities in the neighbourhood of Smithfield Market, where it is performed under the especial patronage of the aldermen of the City of London. Weedon. The next station after Blisworth is Weedon, properly Weedon Beck, so called because formerly there was established in here a religious house or cell to the Abbey of Bec in Normandy. The church, a very ancient building, contains portions of Norman and various styles of English architecture. The importance of Weedon rests at its being the site of a strongly fortified central depot for artillery, small arms, and ammunition, with extensive barracks, well worth seeing, but not to be seen without an order from the Board of Ordnance. In passing, a few mild soldiers may be seen fishing for roach in the canal, and a few active ones playing cricket in summer. The Weedon system of fortification eschews lofty towers and threatening battlemented walls, and all that constitutes the picturesque, so that Weedon Barracks looks scarcely more warlike than a royal rope manufactory. After Weedon, we pass through Kilsby Tunnel, 2,423 yards long, which was once one of the wonders of the world, but has been, by the progress of railway works, reduced to the level of any other long, dark hole. And before we get to the discussion of the town of Rugby, I think I'm going to call it there. As always, if you'd like to pick up where I'm leaving off, you can find the original on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use, so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night, and sweet dreams.